On the show today, legendary British journalist and author Johann Hari. So he's sold many, many books which are on topics related to embodiment. His latest one, Magic Pill, on Ozempic and similar drugs I have here. Lost Connections, an absolute classic. I think TED Talks had like 90 million hits or something completely ridiculous. He's done films and TV, including with Samuel L. Jackson. And yeah, I'm a little bit nervous actually because he's kind of a big deal. So, Johan, welcome.
Oh, cheers, Mark. Thanks so much.
I always ask people at the beginning how they got into what they do now. So let's hear a bit about your life story before we get into the work.
How did I get into what I do now? I always feel these general existential questions always give me a weird existential crisis. You're like, yeah, who am I and what do I do? How did it happen? Um, what happened? So I'm a journalist. I write nonfiction books. And basically from when I was a little boy, all I could ever really do was write. It's the one thing I'm good at is reading and writing. Um, so when after I went to university, I applied to work at a magazine called The New Statesman, and that's where my journalism career started. I was very unusual. It's nothing to do with me. It's a moment in the shifting in the industry. I think I was literally the last person in Britain to like leave university and go into a paid job in journalism full time. Because I couldn't have afforded to do an unpaid internship. So I was really, really fortunate. I feel like it's that moment when Indiana Jones snatches the hat from under the door, as it's closing, right? I think there are now some programs in journalism where they're sort of paid internships or something. So maybe that's probably a bit of hyperbole what I just said, but yeah, I was certainly one of the last to go into that kind of full-time employment like that.
Okay, let's go through the books one by one. What was the first book?
The first book I wrote was called Chasing the Scream. I think it's the thing that connects all the books that I've written is they're all about a kind of mystery that I want to solve or understand for myself, right? I'm not an expert, I'm a journalist. Um, and so for me, what impels me, I do a huge amount of research for my books. They always involve big journeys, going all over the world, interviewing experts, really doing a deep dive into things. The thing that has to impel me through that is I have to be genuinely curious and genuinely not know the answer. For me, if I knew the answer in advance, it wouldn't be interesting to me. So Chasing the Scream is about, you know, uh, there was a lot of addiction in my family. And one of my earliest memories is of trying to wake up one of my relatives and not being able to, and I was too young to understand why. But as I got older, I realized we had addiction in several members of my family, and nothing I was doing was really working. I didn't really feel I could help them. I didn't really understand a lot about. I felt like although I had a lot of experience and seeing it, I didn't feel I really understood what was going on. Um, And I realized at the time we were coming up to 100 years since drugs were first banned. So that's when we went to war against drug users and people with addiction problems. So yeah, that book then became a kind of big epic story about why we went to war against drugs. Opens with the story of Billie Holiday, the great jazz singer, how she was stalked and effectively killed by the man who launched the war on drugs, Harry Anslinger, right up to the present. I spent time in the killing fields of northern Mexico with cartel members. I ended up going to the only country to decriminalize all drugs. So yeah, it's about that and how we
Johan,
can
you
be
you
very
have
different.
you seem to have an amazing life, like track because you really research things inside out. Like we're going to talk about Ozempic. You haven't just been researching it; you've been on it.
I'm so
You
sorry.
know,
I think
you,
that's my Amazon guy. Hang on one sec. Sorry. So sorry, that's Mark. Hang on one sec.
no worries.
Hello. I'll come down. Thank you. Sorry, Mark. One sec. Sorry, I just got a very weird delivery. Me and my friend are having an election party, and I got delivered 100 Liz Truss masks, face masks. We're going to wear them, and then if she loses her seat, we're all going to burn them in the garden.
Scary, scary stuff.
So anyway,
All
sorry,
right.
you were saying?
Yeah, so you seem to have a fantastic life because you really research things by traveling and going around. I mean, is that sort of deliberately something you've chosen as a lifestyle, or is it just it makes the books juicier that there's that personal involvement?
For me, this sounds really wanky. I'm sure there's a less pretentious way to put this, but um, my books are all a kind of journey in a kind of intellectual and moral sense, right? I always, at the end of my books, know things and believe things I did not know or believe at the beginning, right? And for me, the best way to go on a kind of intellectual journey is to go on a physical journey, right? The way I learn things is by meeting people. Obviously, I read very deeply in the science around the subjects, but it's by meeting people. So if I think about, for my books, like think, for example, about Chasing the Scream, got to think about the people who taught me so much, you know, whether it's Chino Hardin, who's a trans crack dealer in Brooklyn. He's one of the smartest people I know. Rosalio Reta, hitman for one of the deadliest Mexican drug cartels. Not, to be fair, one of the smartest people I know, but like fascinating person. Or Bruce Alexander, who did an experiment that transformed how we think about addiction. If I had not gone and sat with those people and got to know them, I don't think I could have absorbed those lessons. I don't think I would have known what I now know. For me, it has to be, for me, I have a slight allergy to sort of very abstract discussion and arguments, right? I mean, I did study political philosophy, so I'm very familiar with it. But like, when you get to a certain level of abstraction, I kind of think, well, you could just say any old thing, right? Then it becomes more about rhetorical strategies and things like that. So for me, it's always about very practical, okay, on the ground, what's happening to people, what does this mean? And then connecting that to a kind of wider framework is obviously important. But to me, the most important thing is getting to know people. And I think probably my biggest strength as a person, I have lots and lots of weaknesses, but I think my biggest strength as a person is that I really, really like pretty much everyone, right? Like I like people when I
Yeah.
meet them. I find people really interesting. Everyone you ever meet knows loads of things you don't know and has been through all sorts of things that you don't know about. And I'm really curious about people and I love people, right? And that sounds like annoying and Pollyanna-ish, but like that is the reality of it. So for me, yeah, getting to go and meet people, and also just one of the most amazing thing about being a journalist is you're licensed to be unbelievably nosy, right?
Yeah.
You can turn up and just say, you know, how many other people get to just turn up and go, tell me about your mother, tell me about why is your house like this? Tell me about your, yeah, like it's a bizarre, and I'm always surprised by how few people go, who the fuck are you? I'm not telling you that, right? It's a weird, even more than like a therapist or a police officer, there's a kind
Mm.
of incredible thing that journalists can do. Yeah, so I love it.
Great. Yeah, different ways of knowing, as you say, as well. So there's something about that personal connection that isn't just intellectual knowing, which I think people listening to this podcast will get.
And it's so true. If you think about embodiment, you know, obviously the theme of your podcast, sometimes people say to me, God, why did you go to Northern Mexico? Why did you go to Australia? Why do you go to, you know, all these places all over the world? You could just interview people on Zoom. And it's so fascinating. You get 10% from an interview on
Yeah,
Zoom compared to
not the
what you
same.
get face to face, right?
It is not the same.
Yeah, totally.
I think the Lost Connections, your next book, I believe, is the audience here would love that in terms of. Actually, let me ask it this way: where it's that was 2018. It's been COVID since then. Where are you at with these connections that have been broken in psychology and society that mean that people have mental health issues? And that seems to be worse than ever. Like that book to me was almost a few years early compared to what is now the mental health crisis that's crashing in.
Yeah, for people who don't know, Lost Connections is about, there were really two mysteries that drove me to write that book. The first was I was at the time I was about to turn 40. And every single year that I've been alive, depression and anxiety had increased in Britain, the US, and across the Western world. And I was like, well, why? Why is that happening? Why is it that each year that passes, more and more people are finding it harder to get through the day? That seems extraordinary. And the second mystery was a more personal one. You know, when I was a teenager, I remember going to my doctor and explaining that I had this feeling like pain was kind of leaking out of me and I couldn't control it. I couldn't understand it. And my doctor was a very nice person, told me what I now realize was a hugely oversimplified story. My doctor said, well, we know why people get like this. Some people just have something wrong with their brain. You're clearly one of them. All you need to do is take some drugs and you're going to be fine. And I took Seroxat, an antidepressant, for many years and continued to be depressed, right? Which doesn't mean they don't give relief to some people. Clearly they do. And so I wanted to figure out, well, I'm doing everything we're told to do according to the story of our culture, and yet I still feel terrible. What's going on here? So the journey for that book was learning all the evidence about depression and anxiety. In fact, there's scientific evidence for 9 factors that cause anxiety. 2 of them are factors in our biology. There are real brain changes that happen when you become depressed or anxious that can make it harder to get out. And your genes can play some role, though they don't write your destiny. But the rest are all factors in the way we live, right? Many of which have hugely increased, from loneliness to financial insecurity. We can go through many of them, valuing the wrong things in life. And yeah, it's funny you say that about COVID. A friend of mine who just read the book recently said to me, you know, it's like during COVID, we ran an experiment to see if you were correct, right?
Yeah.
You know, like and obviously we had a good reason then, which is there was a virus that was spreading, at least more justifiable than the other reasons that have been given. But, you know, yeah, we had a huge increase in loneliness, for example, to give an obvious one. And we had a huge increase in people feeling depressed and anxious. It's not, you don't have to be Einstein to spot that one, right? But so many of those factors acutely increase. So you think about it, when I wrote Lost Connections, we were already at extraordinarily high
Yes,
levels
yes.
of depression and all indicators of despair, or many of them. And then it went even higher during COVID. So yeah, I think the underlying truths of that book, and most importantly, the solutions that I wrote about in the book, most of that book is about solutions, not the problem, um, are slightly arrogantly, I would say, are more relevant now than even they were when the book was written.
No, I agree in terms of lack of connection to meaning, to
Mm.
bodies, to nature, to many of the factors you highlight there. If someone said to you sort of briefly, why are we all so crazy now? What would be your brief answer to that?
Everyone knows they have natural physical needs. You need food, you need water, you need clean air. If I took those things away from you, you'd be in trouble really quickly. But there's equally strong evidence that all human beings have natural psychological needs. You need to feel you belong. You need to feel your life has meaning and purpose. You need to feel that people see you and value you. You need to know you've got a future that makes sense. And our culture is good at lots of things. I'm glad to be alive today, but we've been getting less and less good at meeting these deep underlying psychological needs for many people. There's a study that asks Americans, how many close friends do you have who you could turn to in a crisis? And when they started doing it years ago, the most common answer was 5. Before COVID, the most common answer, not the average, but the most common answer was none, right? I think the figure is that 42% of Americans agree with the statement, no one knows me well, right? And that's just one of the 9 causes, right? So yeah, our deepest needs as human beings are not being met. We're not living in environments, many good things about the environments we live in, but we're not meeting environments that meet our deeper psychological needs. And there are very practical and targeted ways we can change our environment to do that. And I went to places that had done it.
Mm, mm. If you were, we've got an election coming up in the UK. If you were to, there would be a political party that would be increasing connections. What would that look like? What would be their manifesto or the things their policies might be?
A million things, but I'll give you an example of a very concrete one. One of the heroes of Lost Connections is an amazing doctor. You should have him on the podcast, called Sam Everington. If you want an intro to him, let me know. Wonderful man. So Sam is a GP in a poor part of East London, actually near where I lived for a long time, though sadly he was never my doctor. And Sam had loads of people coming to him with terrible depression and anxiety. And like me, he's not opposed to chemical antidepressants. In fact, he prescribes them, but he could see a few things. Firstly, that chemical antidepressants took the edge off for some people, but generally didn't solve their problem. And secondly, that often they were depressed and anxious for really understandable reasons, like they were really lonely. So Sam pioneered a different approach, one that is now spreading all over Europe. It's called social prescribing. So one day a woman came to see him called Lisa Cunningham, who I got to know later, who'd been shut away in her home with terrible depression and anxiety for 7 years. And Sam said to Lisa, don't worry, I'm going to carry on giving you these drugs. I'm also going to prescribe something else. I'm going to prescribe for you to come here to the doctor's offices twice a week to meet with a group of other depressed and anxious people, not to talk about how shit you feel. You can do that if you want, but that's not the point. What I want you to do is to find something meaningful that you can do together. The first time the group met, Lisa literally started vomiting with anxiety. It was just so overwhelming. But the group started talking. They're thinking, what could we do? These are inner city East London people like me. They didn't know anything about gardening, right? But there was an area behind the doctor's offices that was known as Dog Shit Alley. It was a place where dogs were going shit. They were like, we could turn that into an alley. Or we could turn, sorry, they were like, we could turn that into a garden, right? So they went to the library and got out a load of gardening books. They started watching loads of gardening videos on YouTube. They started to get their fingers in the soil. They started to learn the rhythms of the seasons. The way Lisa put it to me, as the garden began to bloom, we began to bloom, not just because they were reconnecting with nature. There's a lot of evidence that exposure to nature is a really powerful antidepressant, but because they started to form a tribe, they started to form a group, they started to care about each other. If one of them didn't show up, the others would go looking for them, going, hey, what's your problem? Problems are so much easier to solve when you're together and not cut off and isolated. So I would argue, so this approach, the small studies of it that indicates, for example, one in Norway found it was more than twice as effective as chemical antidepressants in reducing depression and anxiety. I think for a kind of obvious reason, one that I saw all over the world, from Sydney to San Francisco to Sao Paulo, it was dealing with some of the deep underlying reasons why we're so depressed and anxious in the first place. Now, I would argue every single doctor's surgery should have a social prescribing wing. The first thing that should happen when people come in with depression and anxiety is they should say, are you lonely? Okay, we've got a group for you, right? By the way, social prescribing costs literally nothing. It's free, right? Got nothing, right? Compared to all the other things in our health system, which are extremely expensive. So I would argue, roll out social prescribing across the whole of Britain. It doesn't have to be gardening. There are many things it can be and do. That would have a huge impact on our country.
Mm. Did you make any changes to your own life, having sort of researched the connection stuff? Was there something that you went, you know what, that's not cool, that's got to change?
Oh, loads of things. So many. One of them was, it might sound a bit strange. This is brilliant research done by a scientist called Dr. Brett Ford and many of her colleagues. She was at Berkeley when I interviewed her there. She's in Toronto now. It's a very simple piece of research in some ways. It asked, so let's imagine that you decided from now on, you're going to spend 2 hours a day trying deliberately to make yourself happier. They wanted to figure out, would it work? Would you actually become happier? And they did this research in 4 countries: the United States, Japan, China, and Taiwan. I'm sorry, I've said that wrong. So I say again. They did it in 4 countries: the United States, Russia, Japan, and Taiwan. And what they discovered at first seems really weird. In the United States, if you try to make yourself happier, on average, it doesn't work. You don't become happier. But in the other countries, if you try to make yourself happier, it does work. You do, on average, become happier. And they were like, that's weird. What's going on? So I looked at it more. What they discovered was, in the United States, and I'm sure we would be like this in Britain mostly, if you try to make yourself happier, you do something for you, right? You work harder to get a promotion. You go shopping and treat yourself and then display it on Instagram to make people say, OMG, so jealous, right? We have an instinctively individualistic idea about what it means to be happy. You want to be happy, you do you, right? In the other countries, Russia, Taiwan, and Japan, in the main, when people tried to make themselves happier, they did something for someone else, right? They tried to help their friends, their family, their community. So they have an instinctively collectivist idea of what it means to be happy. You do the group, right? Even think about like the self-help cliches we say, you know, oh, be yourself, right? Be you, right? It's even on, I think it's on
Oh.
my shampoo bottle, right? And the truth is actually, to be happy, don't be yourself. Don't be you. Be us, be we, be the group, right? So I think before, when I would start feeling depressed or down, very often I would go into this individualistic script. I would try to double down on individual personal achievement. That's always been my kind of go-to, right? Work harder, do more. And now, and that's still a big part of me. And of course, healthy personality should have some of that, but it shouldn't be so dominant as it is in our culture. Now I don't get depressed anymore, but when I get down, very often I'll say to myself, okay, what could I do for someone else now? I can't make myself feel better. What can I do for someone else? And when you feel down, you can almost always make someone else feel better. And it doesn't have to be like, I'm not Oprah, I can't turn up and give them a free car. But what I can do is leave my phone at home and go and sit with them and just listen to them. And that, in such a lonely, distracted culture, that is the best gift you can give. Leave your phone at home, go and listen to someone, look into their eyes, properly pay attention, think about them, think about what they're saying to you.
Yeah, I mean, Leave the Phone at Home brings us on to really to Stolen Focus. I mean, along with Jonathan Haidt's book, I think, those two books are like mandatory reading for anyone who's a parent,
Oh,
for example. And what's your take on that now? Because that was still, what are we looking, 2 or 3 years ago?
yeah.
So mobile phones still fuck with us, right?
I mean, so Stolen Focus is about our whole attention crisis. The average office worker now focuses on any one task for, I think it's 49 seconds. Exact numbers in the book. For every one child who was identified with serious attention problems when I was 7 years old, there's now 100 children who've been identified with that problem. And I wanted to understand why it was happening to us, partly because I was really worried about some of the young people I love who really were almost like spinning at the speed of Snapchat. This is before TikTok. Um, and yeah, so actually, interestingly, what I learned is there's actually 12 factors that are harming our attention. Only one of them is some aspects of our technology, which my friend Jonathan Haidt mentioned, who's an amazing person, has written about brilliantly. Um, Actually, there's lots of factors that are doing that. The food we eat is really negatively affecting our attention. Air pollution is really negatively affecting our attention. The way our offices are designed, the way our kids' schools are designed, our lack of sleep, there's a whole array of factors that are really negatively affecting our attention. So yeah, I think again, that crisis has only got more acute since I wrote the book. I mean, maybe I'm like a curse, like I describe something and then it gets worse. I don't know. But yeah, that's a really it's a huge problem. It's getting worse. The evidence is clear. It's getting worse over time. And what's maddening is that there are solutions, right? I go through them very clearly in the book. We know what would solve a lot of these problems. Yeah.
Okay, well, that brings us sort of up to date to this. I mean, I don't want to get flirty, but you are looking pretty damn good.
Oh, thanks so much.
Some of the
Wow.
older videos I've seen, you've been on the drugs, right? You've been on the Ozempic and or one of the others.
Yeah, if they didn't hear the word Ozempic, you make it sound like I've been smoking crack or something. Do
No,
you want to be
no
clear?
crack as
Not
far as I can tell, right? But you've been looking at these new weight loss drugs. My best friend actually is on one of them. She's quite
oh, really?
disabled and she can't walk much or exercise much. And for her, it's been a real blessing. She's been on one of the other ones, not Ozempic. And so we've been chatting about this, me and her, quite a lot. And she was asking me, okay, what about the health risks? And I've heard, for her, she understands that the health risks of being obese are way worse than the health risks of taking the drug. So for her, it was an easy decision. But she's still kind of anxious about it. And you lay it all out, don't you, in the book?
Yeah, I mean, for people who don't know, because it's sort of the news is just sort of filtering through in Britain. So we now have a weight loss drug, Ozempic, that also Wegovy, it's essentially the same drug, that causes the average person who takes it to lose 15% of their body weight in a year. The next in this class of drug, which might be what your friend is taking, is Mounjaro, which causes people to lose 21% of their body weight. And the next in this class, which will be available next year probably, Triple G, causes people to lose 24% of their body weight in a year. And the first thing to understand about this is it's not a fad. It's not a kind of you know, craze. It's an extraordinary medical breakthrough. As one of the scientists who worked on it put it to me, we've cracked the code of what causes weight loss, what regulates appetite, and it's gut hormones. I'm sure we'll unpack what that means. But so when I first learned that, I remember thinking two completely contradictory things at the same time. The first thing I thought was, well, this could save my life because I was about to turn 44, which is the age my granddad was when he died of a heart attack. Loads of them, so I never got to know him. Loads of the men in my family get heart disease and die young. My uncle died of a heart attack. My dad had terrible heart problems, so they didn't kill him. Um, and I knew that, you know, obesity makes you much more likely to get heart disease and much more likely to die of it if you do. And I knew that actually obesity causes or makes worse over 200 known medical conditions. So I thought, wow, if we've got a drug that can reduce or reverse obesity, that could save my life. But I also thought, wait a minute, this sounds way too good to be true, right? Like this, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? There must be drawbacks. So I ended up, obviously, for the research, I started to take Ozempic. I went on this big journey from Iceland to Minneapolis to Okinawa in the south of Japan to meet kind of the leading critics of the drugs, the biggest defenders of the drugs, and really dig deeply into what these drugs mean for all of us.
So KFC stocks are down. And I mean, so joking
That's
aside, this,
surely just because of me, right?
it's
The lost
just
custom
the
from me
one.
alone is
Yeah,
like,
and KFC London, Berlin is well down. I'm doing it the hard way right now, man, and it is hard, you know. And I've got a coach. I'm pretty well resourced financially. I know about exercise. I know how to cook. You know, unlike a lot of people, like I'm pretty lucky that way. I'm doing it, you know, walking 15,000 steps a day, calorie counting. It is hard just to lose a few kilos. And, you know, for my friend, it's impossible to do a lot of what I'm doing because of her situation. Yeah, there are profound consequences to this. I kind of want to go straight to the piece around society, though, because it does look like these drugs work. The side effects are not nothing, but don't look awful. Time will tell, perhaps. But we could see just large numbers of people on these drugs in the next few years, right?
oh, the current, well, 47% of Americans want to take these drugs. And every person who takes the drugs then becomes a walking advert for the drugs. Everyone goes, well, what happened to Bob? Bob looks completely different. Wow, I've got to get what Bob's on, right? Um, I'm more cautious than your summary just suggested. There are 12 really quite significant risks associated with these drugs, which may over time outweigh the benefits. I'm sure we'll dig into that. But yeah, look, my anticipation is, bearing in mind that 8 years from now, Ozempic goes out of patent, which means by then anyone can manufacture it. It'll be $1 a day. It'll be what, 80p a day, something like that. And it'll be a daily pill. I think it's an underestimate to say 50% of British people will be taking it, given that 70% of us
Yeah,
are overweight or obese, assuming that some of the 12 big risks don't turn out to be more severe
yeah.
than we currently think they are. And I do not rule that out, by the way. That's a significant risk. Yeah, I mean, this is going to be one of the defining drugs of our lifetime, on a par with the contraceptive pill, I would argue, in terms of, and don't take my word for it, Barclays Bank commissioned a very sober-minded financial analyst called Emily Field to go away and look into the implications of these drugs to see, you know, should we be changing our investments based on the implications of these drugs, right? Because obviously they have lots of effects on the economy. She came back and said, if you want a comparison for the effects of these drugs, you've got to look to the invention of the smartphone. And I think she's right. You know, if we've been talking in whatever it was, 2007, the day that Steve Jobs unveiled the iPhone, we would not have been able to game out Tinder and TikTok
Yeah,
and
how that had
Uber
changed the
Eats,
whole dating scene, the whole this
all these things, right?
Amazon. Yeah, yeah,
This is going to change how we look, how we feel, for good and for bad, by the way, our bodies, our healthcare systems, our economies. I mean, this is going to be enormous. I don't think we can underestimate that. And it's going to have, for some people, it's going to be people with heart disease in their families, like me. It will be life-changing. For some people, it will be lethal. People with eating disorders, I'm
that's a
unbelievably
risk,
worried about
right?
that.
Yeah, like young girls, for example, kind of being on it, using it to starve themselves. Because as I understand it from my friend and reading your book and looking up a bit of research, it's not, you just don't feel like eating so much. I think you gave the analogy in another interview. It's like you just had a Christmas dinner and you don't want to eat anything. Like that could be misused, I guess, by people.
Yeah, the way it works is in some ways quite simple. There's a lot of complexities around it. The core is quite simple. If you ate something now, doesn't matter what it is, after a little while, your pancreas will produce a hormone called GLP-1. And GLP-1 is just basically part of your body's natural signals going, hey, you've had enough, stop eating, right? But that natural signal, that natural GLP-1 only stays around in your system for a few minutes and then it's washed away. What these drugs do is they inject you with an artificial copy of GLP-1 that, instead of sticking around for a few minutes, sticks around in your system for a whole week, which, like you say, has this incredible effect that you just feel really full really quickly. So remember, the second day after I took Ozempic, there's a cafe just up the road from where I live when I'm in London that that I used to go into every morning, and I used to order, embarrassed to say this, a massive chicken sandwich with loads of mayo in it. And normally I would wolf that down and I would still want some crisps, right? And that morning I had like 3 or 4 mouthfuls and I was just full. I didn't want any more. And I remember Tatiana, the lovely Brazilian woman who runs the cafe, literally shouting after me, "Are you okay?" when I left, because she was completely baffled that I'd left my food. I'd never done that before. Um, and and so yeah, and that effect, that massive boosting of your sense of fullness using these drugs, the way I've started to think about it based on all the research I've done is that is such a powerful tool. It's like fire, right? Fire is a great tool when I use it to warm up my house. It's a terrible tool when I use it to burn down your house, right? And these drugs are so powerful, they can be used for great good and great harm. So the harm you mentioned, anyone who knows anyone with an eating disorder, I'm pretty sure everyone does now, knows that there's a kind of conflict within them. There's the biological part of them that wants to live and therefore wants to eat. And there's the psychological part of them that, for complicated reasons, wants to starve themselves. And what these drugs do is they can just amputate your appetite if you take too high a dose, right? This is why Dr. Kimberly Dennis, who's one of the leading eating disorders experts in the US, said to me, these drugs are rocket fuel for eating disorders. So one thing we need to really urgently do is, I can see you on Zoom. You are not eligible for these drugs. I'm pretty clear from looking at you. It looks to me like you've got a BMI lower than 27, right? Exactly. The very impressive arms as well. I gotta be flirty back. You should not be given these drugs, right? But I guarantee you that you could get an appointment on Zoom tomorrow with a doctor. The
I'd be
doctor would,
tempted.
yeah, and the doctor is meant to check your BMI, but good luck doing that on Zoom.
Yeah.
And frankly, a lot of doctors, there are some responsible doctors, but there are many who are not being responsible and not even bothering to check people's BMI or trying to. And you could get it tomorrow, right? I don't think there's anyone listening who could not legally get these drugs, right? Now, what Dr. Dennis and other people are arguing is we urgently need to change the rules so that you only get these drugs through an in-person appointment with a doctor who checks your BMI, checks that you don't have an eating disorder. Obviously, they should be trained in spotting that, and only gives you the drugs, or if you've got type 2 diabetes, which obviously another legitimate use of these drugs. And if you don't match the criteria, you don't get them. If we don't do that, I fear that in addition to huge benefits for people like me, and we know that reducing or reversing obesity hugely boosts health, but in addition to people like me, there will be an opioid-like death toll of young girls, and eating disorders is overwhelmingly young girls, who will die. So we've really got to get onto this.
Yeah, I predict that when it becomes cheap enough, obesity will become a status symbol. In that, at the moment, there may be a time when aesthetically everyone's on it, and that just becomes a very hard pressure for an aesthetic norm for people. And then there could even be a flip with that in terms of people saying, well, I'm rich enough to be unhealthy and not be on this. A bit of a wild theory, but
No, it's interesting. Have you watched the South Park Ozempic special?
no, I haven't. No,
You should watch it. It's brilliant. But it's exactly that. When Cartman goes to the doctor to get Ozempic, they can't afford it. And he says, yeah, we have Ozempic for rich people and body positivity for poor people. And he gets a prescription for Lizzo which is not to say there aren't good arguments for body positivity. There are. But yeah, no, you're totally right. And at the moment, we're in a kind of dystopian situation where the Real Housewives of New Jersey get to be bone thin, while the real school children of New Jersey get to be diabetic at the age of 12, right? I was just on a show with one of the Real Housewives of New Jersey, and she was saying, we're all on it. And they weren't fat when they started. They were all skinny at the start, right?
Yeah,
Which incurs there's a lot of health risks to them. Going from being skinny to being super skinny actually incurs quite a lot of risks. So I'd really urge people not to do that. Although
what
I
happens when
understand.
you come off it, Johan? Like, because my friend's worried that she'll have to keep taking it forever and it's quite expensive for her now. Like, if you come off it, you put on a bunch of the weight back straight away, or how does it work?
This is contested. What the drug companies say, and they have got studies that back this up, is these drugs are like blood pressure medications or like statins. They work for as long as you take them, and as soon as you stop taking them, they stop working, right? Which means it's a lifelong commitment. When you take these drugs, it's not a holiday fling, it's a marriage, and it's a marriage if you're a Mormon. You don't get out. What Some people seem to be anecdotally saying is that they've used these drugs to interrupt their eating patterns, stopped, and managed to maintain a lower weight. We'll get better research on this as the years go by. But I suspect drug companies, they've got a vested interest in saying that. Obviously, they want us to buy it forever. I suspect they're probably right, but we don't know, is the honest answer. But the assumption at the moment is you have to carry on taking them over the long term, which of course points to another one of the significant risks, which is it's actually one of the 12 risks that I write about in Magic Pill. It's the one that I'm most worried about for myself, which is we just don't know the long-term effects of these drugs, right? We know these drugs, with the evidence is increasingly clear, these drugs work primarily on your brain and not just on your gut. You have GLP-1 receptors in your brain as well as in your gut. And there's an analogy that one scientist raised with me. I want to be cautious about how I explain it. But he said, think about antipsychotics, obviously a very different kind of drug, but think about antipsychotics. If you go back to the late 50s, early 60s, when doctors first started to give them to people, they judged at the time the benefits outweighed the risks based on the best evidence at the time, in their view. It was only like 40 years later that they discovered if you take these drugs for 40 years, you're much more likely to get dementia. All kinds of dementia are significantly increased by taking antipsychotics. Now, it's not that they were being irresponsible in the 50s and 60s. Just how could you have known that? You had to have people taking it for a really long time. Now, I want to be clear. There's no reason to believe these drugs will cause dementia, right? I'm not saying that.
Sure. Who
I'm just
knows?
saying by analogy, we just don't know the long-term effects. But against that, one of the leading obesity specialists that I interviewed, Dr. Shauna Levy, who's at Tulane University School of Medicine in New Orleans, said to me, we don't know the long-term risks of these drugs. We do know the long-term risks of obesity, and they're really significant, right?
Are you going to keep taking it?
For me, the thing that decided it is when the studies came in saying that if you take these drugs and you had a BMI higher than 27 at the start, you are 20% less likely to have a heart attack or stroke. So for me, at that point, it became a pretty easy decision. But many other people will go through the list of the risks of obesity and the risks of the drugs that I describe in Magic Pill and go, you know what? This is not the risk for me. I'm not going to do this. It's a very finely judged thing. I don't have a high degree of confidence that I've made the right decision. I think, but for me, I've decided to continue taking them. And,
Okay.
it's hard to disentangle that. I've got to be honest.
I
Had some
I
friends.
can't have a judgment for sure because it's how do you weigh it, right?
Yeah, and it's funny that we can't even describe it without using words like way. It's so trapped in the language, we can't even use metaphors without getting trapped into it. But it's very hard as well to disentangle that. I had a friend I describe her in the book. So, like we mentioned before, like I process things through talking to people, right? So I do a huge amount of reading and research, but I talk to people. It's how I like to engage with the world. And so I'm lucky I've got friends who are interested in the kind of things I'm interested in. So, I always process things through talking to my friends. I've got one friend, a really close friend, a great person who I've been friends with since 1998. So however many years that is now. Since the last time we had a Labour government, in fact. Last time a Labour government won. Just about. She was really pissed off with me all the time. I kept trying to bring up this subject, and she was kind of pissy in a way she's never been with me. And she's not herself overweight, so it wasn't like a personal sensitivity. And one night she doesn't live in London, she came to London, and I took her out for dinner. I was talking about, the kind of what we're talking about, actually, the benefits, weighing risks and benefits. And she just said, I can't listen to another fucking word of this. I was like, well, what's going on? And she said, you're not being honest with yourself. Keep telling me this is all about health and just be honest. All the time I've known you, you've never been that happy with how you look.
Yes.
Now you're happy with the way you look. This is about vanity. Just level with me, right? It's okay. Be vain if you want to be vain, but don't fucking tell me you're doing it, in this. And, she knows me very well. And I think she overstated it. There was obviously a real health concern on my part, as on the part of, there should be on the part of everyone who's overweight or obese because of the scientific evidence. But I do think she was articulating a difficult truth, which is it's very hard for me to disentangle the health benefits from the fact that, like,
You want to look good naked.
well, a few months in, my neighbor's hot gardener hit on me, right?
Yeah.
Still texts me, right? Like, there's a lot of yeah, there are benefits to losing weight that are not just health benefits, right? Um, and yeah, I think we've got to level with people about that. It's not an obvious. Yeah.
And this sort of psychological stuff that comes with it as well, right? Like, I mean, we need to wrap up soon, but
Sure, sure.
I was touched and listening to another interview of yours where you said you realized that you couldn't, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but couldn't really self-medicate with the food anymore. It was like, oh shit, I've got feelings and I can't eat them away because I'm not hungry. So you were sort of positively confronted with some stuff, I think, right?
There's loads of things that I wish I had known before I was going to start taking the drugs, and this is a difficult one. So it was kind of weird, right? The first 6 months I was taking the drugs, I was getting what I wanted, right? I lost a huge amount of weight, my back pain went away, loads of hot men hit on me, loads of good things happened, right? But weirdly, I didn't actually feel better emotionally. Actually, I felt worse in myself. It's like, this is weird. And I was learning the scientific evidence, which is highly contested, but some scientists are concerned these drugs may be causing depression or even suicidal feelings in some people. Certainly wasn't as bad as that for me, but I did feel like down, right? And I had a real epiphany about this in a KFC in Vegas. So my nephew said to me the other day, it's weird how many of your epiphanies in your life have happened in branches of KFC. I was like, oh, yeah, good point. But I was in Vegas. It was 7 months into taking the drugs, and I was in Vegas because there's a different book I've been researching for an insane number of years about a series of murders that have been happening in Vegas. And I was researching the murder of someone that I knew and really loved. So it was a very, very, challenging thing to do. And I went into the branch of KFC in West Sahara, um, which is one of the roughest KFCs in the world as well. I kind of love it there. Um, and I went in and I ordered what I would have ordered when I wasn't on Ozempic. I ordered a bucket of fried chicken. And I had one chicken drumstick. And I very consciously thought, fuck, I can't eat this. Like, you can't overeat when you're on Ozempic, you would vomit. And I remember really, when you have those sort of epiphanies that almost feel like someone else is saying it to you, I thought, oh, you're just going to have to feel bad then. And I realized what these drugs do is they interrupt your underlying eating patterns, right? It's obviously a necessary good thing. It's why you lose weight. But what that can do is bring to the surface some of the deep underlying emotional reasons why you eat. So in my book, Magic Pill, I go through the 5 reasons why we eat. Only one of them is like to sustain our bodies, right? The rest are all psychological. And there are better ways to deal with your psychological factors you're trying to manage than Colonel Sanders, clearly. But that can be a difficult transition, right? So I think one thing you have to sort of one thing these drugs force you to figure out for many people is what job was overeating doing for me psychologically? And that can be difficult. And I wish I'd been more aware of that in advance. I think it would have helped me to know that was going to be a challenge coming down the road. It didn't make me, I'm still glad I took the drugs. I'm glad I went on that journey, but I wish I'd known that I was going to be forced to do that. That would have helped me.
You didn't start smoking crack as a substitute or anything like that. I think we're all good.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I did not start smoking crack. Don't want to misunderstand the hesitation in my response. But it's fascinating if you look at bariatric surgery. So I think the best comparison for these drugs, the effect they have on us, one of the best guides for what these drugs will do is bariatric surgery. Things like gastric bands, gastric sleeves. If you look at bariatric surgery, it's really interesting. What do we know about bariatric surgery? It's a fucking grim operation. 1 in 1,000 people die in the operation. It's no joke. But why do people go through it? Well, firstly, you see the benefits. If you have bariatric surgery in the 7 years that follow, you are 56% less likely to die of a heart attack. You're 60% less likely to die of cancer. You're 92% less likely to die of diabetes-related causes. In fact, you're 40% less likely to die at all in those 7 years, right? So we know reversing obesity massively boosts health, and that's what these drugs are showing us as well. But it's interesting. If you have bariatric surgery, your suicide risk almost quadruples.
Wow.
And 1 in 10 people who have bariatric surgery have something called addiction transfer, where they become addicted to something like alcohol in the aftermath of it. Now, I think that tells us something about these deep underlying dynamics that
Yeah.
we're talking
Yeah.
about. So,
Yeah. I've worked in trauma quite a lot, and quite a lot of
oh,
people I
really?
coach who are big it's because they don't want to be attractive because they were molested or something like that. There's some really seriously good reasons why people eat, in those ways, and those don't change even if someone doesn't have the appetite. But
yeah, and you can, in fact, exactly those people who, as a result of sexual abuse, consciously or unconsciously gained weight to gain some level of protection from sexual predation. Obviously, you can still be sexually assaulted when you're very overweight, but it's less likely. Can feel incredibly vulnerable when they lose weight, right? And it can reopen a lot of that trauma. So yeah, there's a lot going on there.
you feel good?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I feel now. Now I feel good. Yeah, I feel physically better. I'm definitely physically healthier. I feel, having gone through that slightly bumpy psychological adjustment, I feel more in touch with it. I'm at the sort of end of the promo phase for Magic Pills, so
Yep. Yeah.
I'm about to get back to work. I've got which I'm really excited about. I'm never happier than when I'm actually writing. So I've got this book about Las Vegas that I've been researching since 2011. I'm getting back to writing next week. So I'm really excited for that. And I'm sort of in my head, sort of mentally adjusting for that. So yeah, I feel good.
It's good. You
Thank
look
you
good,
for
man. I've
asking.
been I've been looking at like 5 or 6 years of interviews of you, and you seem healthy and happy now. So it's nice to see.
Oh, thank you so much.
So I recommend your books to everyone listening. I think the embodiment crowd would love all of them actually. Lost Connections, I think particularly the Magic Pill one is good too, if anyone's interested there. Your Instagram is good. The little clips you have about Ozempic and weight loss are pretty good on Instagram. Anywhere else people should go to find you?
So yeah, if you go to johannhari.com, you can see where to get the audiobooks, ebooks, physical books for all my books. You can see all my social media. I don't actually look at it myself because I'd be a bit hypocritical having written my book about attention crisis to be on social media all the time. It's such a very helpful discipline that I would look like a complete hypocrite if I was on it. So it helps me stay off it. I go through other techniques in the book as well. Yeah, I'm really glad that it's funny, at the end of an interview I did a couple of years ago, the guy said to me, "What's your Facebook?" And I said it. He said, "What's your Twitter?" I said it. He said, "What's your whatever it was, Instagram?" I said it. Then he said, "What's your Snapchat?" And I was like, I am a man in my mid-40s. The only men in their mid-40s on Snapchat are definitely pedophiles, right? Why are they on there otherwise? And he didn't laugh. And I've got a very bad habit. If someone doesn't laugh at one of my jokes, I double down on it. I must not do this in my life. So I said, who's an American, and there's an American TV show called To Catch a Predator, which some people will know. It's basically they sort of catfish pedophiles. They pretend to be children and then sort of catch them. And I said, the next season of To Catch a Predator should literally be they just go up to adult men in the street and say, "What is your Snapchat handle?" And if they've got one, fucking bundle them in the van immediately, right? He again didn't laugh. I later looked it up. He's a 50-year-old man who appears to be very active on Snapchat. So my new bar for all interviews is to not accidentally accuse the host of being a paedophile.
That
And I'm very glad in this interview,
you
it
managed
did not
it.
at all be a paedophile.
Johan, I think that's a beautiful place to end. Thank you. It was like
Poetic
a good
moment.
time,
Yeah,
mate.
no Jimmy Savile. There we go.